You wake up early. You go to work. You try to be responsible with your money. Maybe you've even cut back on things you used to enjoy. Less eating out, fewer impulsive purchases. You tell yourself, I'm doing better now. But then you check your bank account. There's money there, but not enough to feel secure. You look at your savings, it's growing but painfully slow. And your debt? Still there, still waiting. Meanwhile, you open social media, and suddenly it feels like everyone is ahead of you. People your age buying houses, traveling, investing, talking about six-figure portfolios like it's normal. And you just sit there thinking, what am I doing wrong? Here's the thing. You're not lazy. You're not irresponsible. And you're definitely not the only one feeling this way. But here's what most people don't realize. The financial system most people follow, it looks right on the surface. Work hard, save money, avoid mistakes. But underneath, it's slow, it's inefficient. And for a lot of people, it leads to feeling stuck. Look, the truth is, most people aren't actually building wealth. They're just maintaining their current situation slightly better each year. And that's why this feeling doesn't go away. So before you blame yourself, you need to understand the numbers, the real numbers. Because once you see them clearly, everything starts to make a lot more sense. My name is Demas, and I spend way too much time thinking about money. If you're someone who feels stuck financially, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Look, this video isn't about making you feel bad. It's not about comparing you to someone who got lucky with crypto, started a business at 19, or inherited money, because that's not reality for most people. This is about something much more useful. Clarity. Now you might be thinking, do I actually need to know average net worth? Here's the thing. Most people avoid looking at these numbers because they're afraid of what they might find. Either they feel behind or they realize they're not as far ahead as they thought. But here's what most people don't realize. Ignoring the numbers doesn't protect you. It just keeps you stuck. Because without a reference point, you don't know if you're progressing, if your strategy is working, or if you need to change direction. And that's dangerous. Look, money is one of those areas where feedback matters. If you're going to spend 10, 20, 30 years working, you should at least know if it's leading somewhere. So in this video, we're going to break it down step by step. Real data, real comparisons, and more importantly, what those numbers actually mean for your life. Because this is where it gets really interesting. Once you understand how net worth really works, you stop guessing, and you start making decisions that actually move you forward. Let's talk about the advice you've probably heard your entire life. Save more money. Spend less than you earn. Start investing early. Avoid debt. Look, on paper, that sounds perfect. If you follow all of that, you should be financially ahead. But here's the problem. A lot of people are doing these things, and they still feel stuck. Now you might be thinking, maybe I'm just not doing enough. But here's the thing. It's not always about doing more. Sometimes it's about understanding why what you're doing isn't working fast enough. Because most financial advice is too general. It assumes your income is stable, your expenses are predictable, and your behavior is perfectly disciplined. But real life doesn't work like that. You get unexpected bills, your motivation drops, your priorities change, and suddenly that perfect plan starts falling apart. Here's what most people don't realize. Saving money alone won't make you wealthy. It just makes you stable. And stability is important, but it has a ceiling. Look, if you save $300 a month, that's $3,600 a year. After 5 years, that's $18,000. That's good. But it's not life-changing. And that's where frustration starts. Because you're doing the right thing, but the results don't match the effort. This is where it gets really interesting. The issue isn't discipline, it's leverage. Most people are playing a small game with money. They focus only on cutting expenses, saving small amounts, avoiding mistakes. But they ignore growth, compounding, and scaling income. So over time, progress feels slow. And eventually, they start to feel stuck. Not because they're doing things wrong, but because they're missing the bigger picture. All right, let's get into the numbers, because this is where things start to get real. According to data from the Federal Reserve, the average net worth for people in their late 20s to early 30s is around $100,000 to $135,000. Sounds good, right? But here's the thing. That number is misleading. Because when you look at the median, the number that represents what most people actually have, it drops to around $30,000 to $40,000. That's a huge gap. Here's what most people don't realize. A small percentage of high earners completely distort the average. So when you compare yourself to that big number, you feel behind, even when you're actually doing okay. Now let's make this more concrete. Let's say you have $20,000 saved at age 30. You might feel like that's not enough. But in reality, you're not that far off from the median. And this is where it gets really interesting. Wealth isn't built in a straight line. It's built exponentially. Let me show you. If you invest $400 per month with a 7% annual return, after 5 years, around $28,000. After 10 years, around $69,000. After 20 years, over $200,000. Notice something? The first 5-10 years feel slow, almost disappointing. But after that, things start accelerating. Now you might be thinking, okay, but I don't have much to invest right now. That's exactly the point. The early stage is always the hardest. Because your effort is high, but the visible results are low. Look, most people quit during this phase. They stop investing. They lose consistency. They think it's not working. But in reality, they were just a few years away from momentum. And that's why understanding the math matters. Because once you see how compounding actually works, you stop expecting fast results, and you start playing the long game. Look, if money was just about math, most people would already be wealthy. The formulas are simple. The information is everywhere. But that's not the problem. The real problem? Behavior. Now you might be thinking, I just need to be more disciplined. But here's the thing. Even disciplined people make bad financial decisions, not because they're careless, but because they're human. Let's start with one of the biggest factors. Loss aversion. People feel the pain of losing money about twice as strongly as the pleasure of gaining it. So what happens? You hesitate. You delay investing. You wait for the perfect time. You keep your money in cash because it feels safe. But here's what most people don't realize. That safe decision quietly costs you years of growth. Now let's talk about instant gratification. You work hard all month. You finally get paid. And suddenly spending feels justified. Just this once. I deserve it. It's not that much. Look, one purchase doesn't matter. But repeated behavior, that's where the damage happens. Because small amounts, consistently redirected, become massive over time. And then there's risk tolerance. Most people say they're risk-averse, but what they really mean is they're uncomfortable with uncertainty, so they avoid investing. They avoid volatility. They avoid anything that feels unpredictable. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Doing nothing is also a decision. And over time, inflation guarantees that your money loses value. So ironically, by avoiding risk, you're actually accepting a different kind of loss. This is where it gets really important. Wealth isn't built by perfect decisions. It's built by consistent, slightly uncomfortable ones. Investing when it feels uncertain. Saving when it's tempting to spend. Staying patient when results are slow. Look, the people who build wealth aren't always smarter. They just understand their own behavior and design systems to work with it, not against it. This is where it gets really interesting, because when you look at people who actually build wealth over time, they're not just doing more, they're thinking differently. And one of the biggest shifts is this. They stop focusing on income and start focusing on net worth. Look, income feels good. A higher salary feels like progress. But here's the thing. If your lifestyle increases at the same rate as your income, your net worth doesn't move. You're just operating at a higher level with the same result. Here's what most people don't realize. Wealth is not about how much you make. It's about how much you keep and grow. Now let's go deeper. Wealthy people understand time in a very different way. They don't expect fast results. They expect delayed rewards. And because of that, they don't interrupt compounding. They invest consistently. They hold through uncertainty. They let time do the heavy lifting. Look, most people start strong, but they stop when the market drops, progress feels slow, or life gets in the way. And that interruption, it resets momentum. This is why consistency is more powerful than intensity. Now let's talk about something people often misunderstand. Debt. Most people see all debt as bad, but wealthy individuals, they separate it. High-interest consumer debt, avoid or eliminate. Low-interest, strategic debt, sometimes useful. Now you might be thinking, debt is still risky. And you're right. But here's the nuance. If you borrow at 4% and invest at 7 to 8% over time, you're using leverage to accelerate growth. That's a completely different game. This is where it gets really important. Wealthy people don't just avoid mistakes. They optimize decisions. They think in terms of opportunity cost, long-term impact, and compounding effects. Look, it's not about being perfect. It's about seeing the game clearly. And once you do, you stop playing defense with money and start playing offense. Now let's address the question that almost everyone struggles with. Should I invest or pay off debt first? Look, this is where a lot of people get stuck because they're trying to find a perfect answer. But here's the thing. There isn't one. There's only a better decision based on your situation. So instead of guessing, let's break it down logically. First, interest rate. This is your baseline. If you have credit card debt at 18%, that's not just debt. That's a financial emergency because every dollar you don't pay off is costing you 18% per year. Here's what most people don't realize. Paying off that debt is the same as getting a guaranteed 18% return. You're not going to consistently beat that in the market. So in that case, focus aggressively on eliminating it. Now, what if your debt is lower? Let's say 5-7%, like student loans. This is where it gets less obvious, because now investing could outperform your debt over time. Now you might be thinking, so I should just invest instead? Not so fast, because this is where behavior comes in. If having debt stresses you out, if it keeps you up at night, then mathematically optimal doesn't matter, because you won't stay consistent. And consistency is everything. So here's a more realistic approach. Hybrid strategy. Let's say you have $500 extra each month. Instead of choosing one side completely, put $300 toward debt. Put $200 into investments. What does this do? It keeps you moving in both directions. You reduce risk while still building future growth. And more importantly, you stay engaged. Because here's the real danger. Doing nothing. Overthinking. Waiting too long to decide. Look, you don't need a perfect strategy. You need a strategy you can stick to. Because over time, consistency beats optimization. Every single time. So let's bring everything together. At this point, you've seen the numbers. You understand the patterns. And more importantly, you see what most people miss. Here's the truth. You're probably not as behind as you think. It just feels that way because you've been comparing yourself to unrealistic standards or to people who are playing a completely different game. Look, most people never build meaningful wealth, not because they don't work hard, but because they don't understand how money actually grows. Give up too early or keep switching strategies before anything works. And this is where it gets really important. Wealth isn't built in big, dramatic moments. It's built quietly, through small decisions, choosing to invest instead of spend, staying consistent when it feels boring, being patient when results don't show up yet. Now you might be thinking, but what if I'm already late? Here's the thing. The best time to start was years ago. The second best time? Now. Because time is still on your side, if you start using it correctly. Look, you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to make risky moves. You don't need to chase trends or get lucky. You just need to understand the system, stay consistent, and avoid the major mistakes. Because over the next 10-20 years, those simple actions compound into something powerful. This is where everything shifts. You stop feeling stuck. You stop reacting emotionally. And you start making decisions with clarity. So instead of asking, am I behind? Start asking, am I moving forward? Because that's the only question that actually matters. And if the answer is yes, then you're already on the right path.